Critical Role's Daggerheart gives you no fewer than 18 different ancestries to choose from when creating your character, but on closer inspection with each of these ancestries, I had to ask myself, do these deliver any meaningful depth or choice, or are they all just shallow kitchen sink fantasy window dressing? Each ancestry gives you some physical traits, a bit of descriptive flavor, and exactly 2 mechanical features. That's it. 2 features to define your entire genetic and biological heritage for the rest of your character's adventuring career. For me, this raises a fascinating question that cuts right to the heart of modern RPG design and philosophy. On one hand, if you're endeavoring to roleplay and tell a story through the eyes and the mind of a character, their biological ancestry might have an outsized impact on that story. But on the other hand, there's a movement in some circles away from determining almost anything about a character based on their genetic heritage. In this video, I want to examine Daggerheart's ancestry system through a few different lenses. We'll look at how it stacks up against a couple of other widespread RPG systems, whether these features actually maintain their relevance over long-term play, and ultimately whether shallow is even the right criticism to level here. First, let's break down exactly what you're getting with Daggerheart's ancestries. In most cases, there is no scaling or level-based unlocks, just 2 abilities that define your character's biological heritage from level 1 through 10. The game has 18 base ancestries to choose from, plus mixed ancestry rules that let you pair any 2 features from any of the different lineages. Let's see what they actually are. Clanks are sentient mechanical beings that get purposeful design, a bonus to 1 experience based on their creation, and efficient, which lets them take long rest moves during short rests. Dracona are dragonkin with scales that reduce severe damage, and elemental breath for ranged magical attacks. Dwarves have thick skin to convert minor damage to stress instead of hit points, and increased fortitude to cut physical damage in half by spending hope. Elves get quick reactions for advantage on reaction rolls, and Celestial Trance for extra downtime moves during rest. Fairies have wings for flight, plus evasion bonuses, and Luckbender to re-roll duality dice once per session. Fauns can make Caprine leaps to vault around the battlefield and use kick attacks for extra damage and knockback. Furbolgs get charge for movement-based damage, and Unshakable to sometimes ignore stress. Fungril have a fungril network for long-distance communication and death connection to extract memories from corpses. Galapa, or turtlefolk, have a protective shell that boosts damage thresholds and can retract for damage resistance. Giants get endurance for extra hit points and reach to extend their melee range. Goblins are sure-footed, ignoring agility disadvantages, with danger sense to force enemy rerolls. Halflings bring Luckbringer to give the whole party hope each session and have an internal compass to reroll hope dice. Humans get high stamina for extra stress slots and adaptability to reroll failed experience-based rolls. Infernus, or Demon Descended, are fearless, being able to convert fear rolls to hope with a dread visage for intimidation advantages. Katari, or Catfolk, have feline instincts to reroll agility hope dice, and retracting claws for vulnerability-inducing attacks. Orcs are sturdy, making attacks disadvantaged when at low health, with tusks for bonus damage. Ribbit, or frogfolk, are amphibious and have a long tongue weapon attack. Simia, or apefolk, are natural climbers with advantage on climbing rolls and get nimble for a permanent evasion bonus. And finally, mixed ancestry lets you pick 1 feature from 1 ancestry and 1 from another. There's some arguments that could be made asserting that these options are just too shallow, such as limited mechanical impact. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the 2 features only limitation. When you stack Daggerheart against other systems, the contrast can be pretty stark. By the way, in this video, I want to use D&D 5e and Pathfinder as sort of benchmarks here because they're representative of a long-standing approach to races in RPGs. So if you look at elves in 5e, for example, they come with a whole boatload of mechanical elements, substantially more than Daggerheart's 2 features. The gap widens with Pathfinder 2e, where ancestries have entire feat progressions. You get ancestry feats at level 1, 5, 9, 13, and 17. That's a lot of mechanics. This highlights Daggerheart's front-loaded design problem. What you get at character creation is often what you get forever. While some features like the Dracona's elemental breath do scale with proficiency, many others remain static. Your fairy's wings work identically at level 10 as they do at level 1. Your Clank's efficient rest ability never evolves. There's often a limited sense of growing into your heritage or discovering new ancestral abilities beyond the mechanical scaling of a few combat-focused features. And as you might have deduced already, Daggerheart ancestries don't modify your core stats at all. No ability score increases, no trait bonuses, nothing like that. In D&D, being an orc means you're inherently stronger, but in Daggerheart, a human, giant, and fairy all start with identical potential in every trait. Your ancestry has zero impact on some of your fundamental capabilities. Narrative versus mechanical disconnect. Here's where things get a little frustrating. Daggerheart actually has some genuinely evocative ancestry descriptions. The Fungrel with their mycelial networks and memory extraction abilities, the Infernus with their demonic heritage and dread vision, Clanks with their purposeful construction. There's real imagination at work in the flavor text and the conceptualizations here, but when you dig into the actual mechanics, that rich narrative complexity just evaporates. You get a couple of minor abilities that barely scratch the surface of what these ancestries could represent mechanically. Making matters worse is how the game handles culture. Daggerheart splits ancestry and community into separate systems, which means your biological heritage is stripped of almost all cultural context. Your orc ancestry gives you tusks and some damage resistance, but everything about orc society, traditions, and worldview gets handled by whichever community you pick instead. This leaves ancestry feeling like pure biology. You're essentially just picking a different flavor of humanoid rather than choosing a cohesive, crafted cultural biological package. And then again, there's the long-term relevance problem. Some of these features are front-loaded in the most anticlimactic possible way. The Fungrel's network communication, for example, sounds amazing until you realize it only works with other Fungrel. And how often is that actually going to come up in your average campaign? The Halfling's luck boost gives everyone hope at the start of each session, which is nice for about 10 seconds. Compare that to something like the Fairy's Flight, which fundamentally changes how you approach every combat encounter, every exploration challenge, every social situation where position matters. Or the Dracona's Elemental Breath, which gives you a reliable attack option that scales with your proficiency. These stay mechanically relevant throughout your entire career. There's a real imbalance here. Some ancestries give you abilities that matter every session, while others give you situational benefits that might come up every once in a while if you're lucky. But you know, there are some arguments in support of this simplified approach to ancestries, and I want to unpack a few of these as well. Elegant simplicity. The first defense is that Daggerheart's approach represents an intentional simplicity in design, two impactful ancestry features rather than overwhelming complexity. And there's something to be said for this. When you look at 5e or Pathfinder's more complex races, how many of those features do new players actually remember and use? With only 2 features per ancestry, players can actually keep track of what their characters can do without constantly referencing their character sheet. Your fairy player will never forget that they can fly. Your dwarf player will always remember their damage mitigation because it's one of only 2 things that make them a dwarf in the first place. There's real value in having ancestry features that are memorable and regularly used rather than comprehensive in scope, but either a burden or forgotten. And let's be honest about the newcomer-friendly aspect. Darrington Press wants to attract a new generation of GMs and players, not the cranky old curmudgeons who shake their fists at the clouds, or in this case, the cards. And a player picking up Daggerheart as their first RPG can look at these ancestries and immediately understand what their character does rather than trying to parse through feat trees, conditional bonuses, and edge case abilities. Meaningful mechanical choices. While there may be fewer features, the ones that exist might be considered by some as genuinely meaningful. Wings don't become irrelevant at higher levels. If anything, flight becomes more valuable as encounters get more complex and positioning becomes critical. Damage resistances like the dwarf's thick skin or the Galapagos shell never stop mattering because enemies never stop trying to hurt you. More importantly, several of these features create ongoing tactical decisions rather than just passive bonuses. The fairy's luck bender isn't just you're lucky sometimes, it's a once per session resource that forces you to think strategically about when to use it. Do you save it for a crucial possible life or death situation, or burn it early on a failed attack? The dwarf's damage mitigation requires spending hope, which means every time you take a big hit, you're making a resource management decision. These are active choices that engage with the game's core mechanics. And I haven't really talked about class abilities in this game, which are far more complex and interesting, but here's the thing, your ancestry never threatens to overshadow your class features because it's operating in a different mechanical space. A guardian's unstoppable ability doesn't clash with their giant ancestry's reach. They work together to create a unique character build. You could almost say that Daggerheart's restrained ancestry approach enhances your class choice rather than competes with it. Narrative flexibility over mechanical constraint. I think it's important to remember that Daggerheart's design philosophy really prioritizes narrative flexibility over mechanical prescription. They haven't made any secret about trying to break free of the monotonous record keeping and rules lawyering that players get trapped in with games like 5e or Pathfinder. The separation between ancestry and community systems is also not an accident. By handling culture through the community framework, Daggerheart avoids the problematic implication that your biology determines your culture. Your orc ancestry gives you tusks and physical resilience, but whether you're from a scholarly lore-born community or a militant order-born society is entirely up to you. The burden of character development is shifted onto the player's shoulders. Instead of having personality and capabilities heavily influenced by mechanical ancestry features, you get to decide who your character is. The system gives you some brief suggestions and then steps back, trusting you to build a genuinely interesting character rather than trying to do it for you through increasingly complex mechanical subsystems. The long-term play question. I guess I could argue both ways on this game's ancestries, but I still have some questions that get to the heart of whether this system actually works in practice. The big one is Session 1 versus Session 50. We can theorize all we want about elegant design, but what happens when you're deep into a long-term campaign? Do those two ancestry features still feel meaningful when your character has acquired dozens of domain cards, multi-class abilities, and narrative complications? I suspect the answer varies wildly depending on which ancestry you picked. That fairy's flight is probably still defining encounters at Session 50, but what about the halfling's party-wide hope bonus? Would anyone even remember that that's happening after 50 sessions? Then there's the character growth question that really bothers me. Your ancestry represents your fundamental nature, your biological heritage. So why in so many cases does it not evolve as your character evolves? The static nature of a lot of these features feels disconnected from how characters traditionally develop over long campaigns. Table variation is huge here too. Some GMs are going to create scenarios where your fungral's network communication actually matters, others will completely forget it exists. Some tables love tactical positioning where flight and reach matter constantly. Others handwave movement and focus on pure narrative. How much of this system's success depends entirely on your specific GM's style? I can genuinely see it both ways here, but I'll be honest. It's hard for me to personally pay such short shrift to ancestries. When I'm creating a character, choosing to be an elf or dwarf or something more exotic like a fungrel feels like it should be a foundational decision that ripples through every aspect of play. But two features that most likely never grow or evolve, that just feels insufficient for something that's supposed to represent your character's fundamental physiological makeup. And here's the thing that really gets me. This is not a rules light game. Daggerheart has dozens of domain cards that you pair up to define your character, intricate multi-classing rules, detailed combat mechanics with duality dice, and sophisticated tools for managing fear and hope. The game clearly isn't afraid of mechanical complexity when it serves the design goals, but when it comes to ancestries, suddenly we get this very rules-light approach. It's going to take me some time to get used to that disconnect, especially if I'm ever planning on running or playing in a campaign with the same PCs that's more than just a few sessions long. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. If you have any different arguments against or in defense of this design decision, and how ancestry abilities actually panned out for you at your table if you've played Daggerheart for more than a couple of sessions. Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see ya.